Hello, and welcome to the Weekly Scroll Podcast. My name is Ryan.
And I've been recently re-sleeved, so I'm not sure who I am yet.
Wow, I wish I had recently been re-sleeved. This sleeve sucks. I am Max Lander. I have made a bunch of role-playing games, chiefly among them being Himbos of Myth and Metal, my personal favorite, Frame 352, and also my new refound love, Handbaskets.
Handbaskets. Yes.
It's happening.
Yeah, I think was it Himbos last time you were on when we were chatting about Himbos? Yeah, Himbos is such a good game in so many different ways. I bring it up all the time.
Isn't it though?
It is.
I'm very humble about Himbos.
It really is. Like on top of
it really is a good one now.
Instantaneous tangent. Welcome to the Weekly Scroll Podcast. I tell people all the time, I'm like, if you're playing a D20 game and you don't use like the kind of, it's not mixed success, but like kind of like that threshold that's in Himbos, you're not using D20s right, because it's just such a good way to really make it a lot easier to GM. Yeah.
Single-handedly saving the D20, which I did not think would be my job in the world, but here we are.
I believe we are all in the same 2d6 is best cat. Well, not on our D20 roll under, but 2d6 for the win.
I love a D20 roll under, you know?
Someone in chat just said Himbos is my go-to upbeat fantasy game.
Yes. Nice.
Yeah, I feel like I've had an extremely chaotic couple years of my life, and that has coincided with releasing some games. And then every once in a while, I go back and read them and realize like it's been 4 months and I haven't touched something like Himbos or like Handbaskets. And I go back and I'm like, wait, I'm good at this. I should play these games more. Which again, super humble, really.
Hey,
but yes,
you know what?
I think
if you make good shit, you should tell people you make good shit. You know.
I also think there's something to like running away from it for a while. Like when you're deep in it, you're like, oh, this is shit. And then you go away for 6 months and you come back and you're like, oh no, I had some cool ideas. Like you can look at it and feel a little bit more confident about where it lives. And I feel like I've done that with most of my games now because I've been in a bit of a lull for releasing things. I'm like, oh no, these were fun.
Well, I don't feel like that about the stuff I've made so far. I go back and I haven't released anything, but I have a bunch of Google Docs of games. And I'm like, I go back and I'm like, oh, this is bad. I should redo this. This is an awful idea. I'm an idiot.
I have a lot of unfinished. I'm only saying that about the things that I've put out into the world. I have many work in progress documents that will stay that way forever for that reason. But the ones that I release out into the world, I feel like I believe in playtesting, and it does a lot. Yeah. The difference between a work in progress doc and a release doc for me is usually at least a few rounds of playtesting, and that like makes a really big difference on the final thing. So I think that, yeah.
What? Why did you say that like it was a dirty word?
I feel like, I don't know. I feel like it's the internet has taught me that like I shouldn't think that everything should be play tested. I do think that in my heart at heart. Yeah, because Aaron is anti-play testing.
Ooh,
Aaron releases like beautiful poetic things that can also just be read and enjoyed and can be played and enjoyed, and I just like don't have that confidence, and I have the confidence after it's out. But part of it is just that like the amount of times I play tested something and been like, that didn't do what I wanted it to do. I want it to do something different, and I like to find that out before I put it out into the world. Or sometimes you play test and you're like, it did do what I wanted it to do. But for me, that I don't have any kind of confidence that what I'm putting out will communicate what I want it to, unless I actually like have that feedback.
Yeah, I'm super pro playtesting. Like super, like you should playtest like a million times before you put it out. It all comes down to. Okay, well, no, that's a 5-hour conversation I'm going to steer away from really quick. I'll just say I think Death of the Author is terrible, and I disagree with it wholeheartedly. And maybe one day I'll write a blog about it. But I feel like if, again, as someone who has a series of Google Doc games that I've never seen the light of day, I think if you're putting something out, it should at least attempt to be what you want it to be, I guess, is my thought. And if you don't even know what it is, then what is it, I guess? And again, very different schools of thought, I think, across a lot of TTRPG space. It's still such a young hobby industry.
One of those things. Field works. Field is my new word for all games. I also think that one of the things that I really enjoy is all the system stuff. And the system stuff for me, like if I was writing something for an established system, or when I have released things that are like an adventure, I don't necessarily feel like I need to play test it. If I'm releasing something for a different rule system, I don't necessarily feel like I need to play test it. But a lot of what I like to do is like make new things or smash a bunch of things together in different ways. And then I don't know if they're going to work. So
that makes a lot of sense. I have a question. Do you think of tabletop games as an art form?
Get out of here. How dare you? How dare you bring my biggest troll without them being here?
Oh no, they made sure to say it in chat and
yeah,
open that can of worms.
I mean, it's a can of worms because I am an art teacher and I have a lot of feelings about like problems with capital A art, but also the value of capital A art and how creating something for artistic value is different than creating something for commercial value. And so the answer is they can be, but they aren't by default, because in order to make art, you have to choose to make art. And that is a different process and has different values and metrics and goals than making something commercially.
I feel like that's a fine answer. I'm so unbothered by the answer. I'm surprised.
This is because I have just honed it to hit directly back at Aaron. Aaron I have forged this opinion in the fires of discussing things with Aaron.
I think that went over well, and I'm sure no one will leave any comments anywhere about that. So
no, they won't. No, not enough people that create discourse listen to us. But this is actually a topic that I think in my head all the time. And like, it's one of those things. I talk to Hunter and I talk to people all the time. I want to blog really bad because I have thoughts, but I also hate people who think their thoughts are important enough to blog about. So it's like, although I love reading blogs, you know what I mean? It's one of those things where, but like, is TTRPG art is something that I think about all the time. And I personally don't think it is. I think books can be art, but I don't think TTRPG design is art. I think it's craft. And if anyone thinks that that's like a step down, I think they're disrespecting craft, is my thought on it.
See, my actual contentious thought is that I do think in order to make art, you kind of have to develop your craft. And a lot of people don't like that because they think of it as gatekeeping. And I don't mean it in a gatekeepy way. I think anybody can develop skills for art. It's just that it involves time.
People call anything gatekeeping at this point. Anything, I mean, like expectation for the growth of effort put in to do a thing is gatekeeping, right? That's why AI is so great. It really levels the playing field for all of us.
Yeah. I was going to say, a lot of the times I get that thrown at me in response to like my anti-AI opinions, where people are like, well, that's gatekeeping these tools. And I'm like, no, it's not accessibility to not teach people how to control the tools they use. There's usually this jump that is like, well, if we make programming, because I also teach programming, if we make programming if we cut programming out, then it's more accessible. And I'm like, actually, accessibility is about teaching people programming because it's about, redistributing power. It's a whole thing. But yeah, I do feel like, I think craft is like a part of art. And I think that game design across all games, fields, and mediums can be that. But I do think that it is wholly different than making something to sell it. And usually I think if you're making a thing to sell it, you're probably sacrificing some of the artistic value of it.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, Max does everything. A
lot of things.
So yeah, a lot of things. But I started college as an art major, and then don't go to college and be an art major if you want to do art, because they will make sure to beat it out of you. But in a slightly different kind of lens from just capitalism as far as art, I definitely feel, and this is in my personal opinion, let's use qualifiers so that people understand that this is my opinion. I'm not declaring discourse on them.
Get your pitchforks ready, y'all.
Right. I've
later.
always thought there's a big difference between fine art and craft, and like craft to me is something that's like for commercial value, easily like reproducible, and fine art is generally for the sake of the art itself. And to me, TTRPG design, and like you said, like when it's for making money and stuff like that, there becomes a difference to what you're doing. So there is like a difference in the field for like people that do it as a hobby versus people that try to make a living from it and stuff like that. And I do think there becomes a line that gets crossed. Not saying that's a good or a bad thing when you decide something needs to make money versus like having its own inherent value. But then, I mean, you can also get into the conversation, are GMs game designers because they homebrew a rule? The answer is no. But you know, it's one of those things where it's like neither is bad. Like game designing takes, I know people that make amazing games that are terrible GMs. I don't know people that are amazing GMs that couldn't write a game if they wanted to. It's like they're like, you can't look down on like if you look at like an architect and like the head person at like a construction site. I don't know why the name is escaping me. Foreman, like both are incredibly important, and a building would not get made without either of them. But a foreman is not an architect, and an architect is not a foreman. So there's to me personally, I think a lot of the issues that people bring up when it happens is people like say thinking that what they're doing is lesser because it's not the title that they want it to be, versus just being proud of the skill set that they have for doing what they do. I don't know, that tangents on the weekly scroll.
It's all capitalism, right? And a lot of people who would argue that there is more inherent value in any one job than any other job, or any one skill than any other skill, is largely probably doing that through a capitalistic lens, even if it's like internalized classism or not, right? Like a lot of it is internalized classism, and you're just like, well, like in Canada, I think this is different than the States, but in Canada, we have universities and colleges, and they do different things. And colleges are traditionally like work skills, like you are going to get a job at the end of college, and university is generally about like knowledge and the academy and developing whatever, some kind of field of research, and historically that means that people that have always thought of colleges as lesser, and now everybody who goes to college gets a good job, and nobody who goes to university gets a good job. So there's this like, yeah, you know who's getting good jobs? Welders be getting those good jobs, and all of us academics, except for me, I lucked out. But it's a weird, I also didn't plan on this, but yeah. So I think it's a weird thing where I just think they're like totally different. Funnily enough, just to throw it back at Aaron, I think what Aaron does is largely an art practice. So this is, but I don't know if they'd claim that. So I'm just gonna throw that. And part of that is also ties into the need for playtesting or not. If you're making art games, you don't need to playtest. The game could just be about reading it. Like this is so much of that. It could be about personal expression. Like it could just have different goals that aren't the experience of play. And that's totally legit. But
yeah, again, it's an interesting conversation when, especially because you and Aaron, and tell me if I'm completely wrong, trend a little bit more story game than I think me and Hunter do. And I think that opening up of the narrative and the narrative tools, and I want to say the kind of like artsier side of it, I think definitely trends that way a little bit more than someone who's just like, no, D20, like you know, difficulty class, like all this stuff. It's very much more of like textbook than art book a lot of times. So it's interesting, but like even within the field, you know, there's definitely people that see themselves as you know, artists for like the way that they write and the things that they do. And it is difficult because I think there's a big difference between artists and artisans. And again, I think a lot of the reason that people think one is better than the other is the internalized class system, like you say. But to me, I think most TTRPG people that are, I mean, like an artisan is someone who has honed their craft to the point that they can express artistic like have artistic expression within their craft, and that to me is like what TTRPGs is. It's a craft, and some people have reached the point where they can express themselves artistically through that craft. So,
which is funny because that's the lens through which I think most of the games that make the most money really fail. Right? Like that's that. Like I would say that like through an artisan lens, this is again hot take, whatever my opinion. Through an artisan lens, games like Dungeons and Dragons fail miserably. They do not have a concise statement. There is no tool set elegance on display. There's not, because it's like 700 million people trying to smash 700 things and largely then basing it to an IP, right? Like it's not. Whereas I think about some people, and this will come up later, so I'll just say this now, but like the game that we're talking about is part of like a dual game where both Aaron and I were obsessed with a mechanic that Adam Vass made, and I feel like Adam Vass is a person that I think of kind of as like peak, for me at least, like one of the peak, both because when I think about like mechanical but also like artistic and writing wise, there's just like all these, and then visual arts, like there's just all these things that are coming together so beautifully in Adam's games. And part of that I attribute to, and this may not be how Adam feels about it, but part of what I attribute that to is just like the consistent re-engagement. Like it's just a constant cycle of like outputting things that sometimes don't hit as hard, but like just making it and releasing it and making it and releasing it and trying different things and all, like just, I don't know, there is a real dedication to craft as like a priority in their life. And I feel like that really shows.
Yeah, this is classically an Adam Vass Stan podcast. So pretty much all great things are said about Adam on this.
Who could like
on a regular basis
like Adam Vass?
If anyone that plays JTRPGs, like especially in the indie scene at all, and doesn't know Adam Vass, just know that it's your favorite game designer's favorite game designer, and like how dare you don't know them, because I feel the exact same way. Adam and the way that they write is one of like the very early things that got me into the indie scene. And when I read some of their stuff, you just went, oh, this is very different than what I thought it could be. And they definitely, the way that they write, I mean, the first time I read Necronautilus, like I've never been the same. You know what I mean?
I got to play Necronautilus for the first time this spring at a con up here in Toronto. Cool. And it was and I'd read it and been like, I love this game so much, and then never had an opportunity to play it, and finally got an opportunity to play it, and it plays how you want it to, and you're like, no, this is just screw you. Screw you, world champion Bill. Once again.
It's so good. Yeah, it's so good. I mean, and then Soul Burner too, and I mean, for those people that do want like a little bit more of like a grounded in the it's like a Necronautilus Merkborg mashup. I don't know if you've read Soul Burner, but like it gives the little bit of crunch and makes it a little bit. I mean, you're literally like a wandering ball of like ash and burnt memories. You know what I mean? Like it's so good. But yeah, I mean that's exactly what we're talking about. Like taking something to a level that you when your memories are your entire existence, but you're living in like the universe of death. Like I don't know. Shit gets it's depth that I only wish that I could reproduce in at all. I've never put out anything. I need to just write one word on a page and publish it on Itch and be like, look, I've done something. Now I can do other things now. Yeah.
Listen, that's the craft development.
So speaking of Adam and everything, so we do have this book in our hands. This is part of the Low Res Futures Kickstarter. We already did Aaron's half, and that was Inimir Brightly, fantastic game. We're talking about Handbaskets in a little bit here. So just talk to us about Handbaskets. I know that I don't know anything. You tell me.
Never heard of the game, never read it. Handbaskets is both a tribute to a specific Adam Bass mechanic, but also it actually started as I was gonna make a series of adventures mini games for Cyber Metal 2012, which is a World Champ Game Co. game that I think is phenomenal, probably one of my top 5 games of all time. And I was like, I want to make something for this. And it started there. And some of the world building of Cyber Metal 2012 is like it's like a future world. There's like bunch of cyber stuff, but then there's also like demons and witches and all that. And I was like, great, I love all of this. I'm going to smash that all together and make. And I was watching a lot of Alice in Borderland at the time, which is such a fun show. And was thinking a lot about like PvP play and how sometimes that's hard to do. And I was like, okay, I'm going to try and make like PvP blood sport, like bad reality TV show game. And so started making these like little mini games. And then realized that I was halfway to making a totally distinct game from Cyber Metal 2012 and just went with it. And so pulled in some other mechanics from other games that I really enjoy, like Kismet, and decided to make it standalone, but tried to keep it so that if you want to play it with Cyber Metal 2012, you can, or you can use the internal system. And I've talked about this on my podcast a bunch, but my dream game that will never exist, but maybe hacked together through a bunch of other things in the world is something that uses a bunch of different mini games, or where you're like, you have this like thin overarching game and then you play like different games as you move through different sessions. And so part of this was also like, what if I make a game where you might just drop it into something else for a session and then leave it alone, so it's not super crunchy. It has some crunch, but it's not as light as some of the other games I've made, but is, I think, pickupable in a single session, largely also because one of the central conceits of the game, both when designing it and communicated in the book, is like, you are meant to take this and rip it apart and break it and like translate it and interpret it in a way that feels fun. And if that goes against whatever, like, lean into just breaking it, lean into you being a central part of the way that this plays. And so it has rules, but then it also tells you to ignore them should you so choose, and is definitely meant to be broken. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even within the I mean, obviously we're going to read through it here in a little bit and talk about it, but even within the like lore of the world and stuff, like the overlays break and crack and glitch and stuff. Like the world you're seeing breaks, so and you can hack in the game and stuff. Or so it makes sense. All of that makes sense within the lore too, for the rules to also feed into it. I mean, that's what makes a good game, when it all, you know, kind of gives you the same vibes and same intentions as you go through.
I feel like sometimes people need to be told, like, need to be given a justification for breaking something. And so I wanted to both like say that out loud with the words in the book, but also be like, as if you can try and structure it. Like, we're in the, you know, cyberpunk or cyber genre of games. We're in this, like, the history in RPGs is to make it really crunchy and really specific, as if those things aren't going to get really confusing. Like, once we have a virtual overlay on the world or whatever, or in a world where everything is kind of virtually overlaid, as if that wouldn't kind of break our psyches a little, like, as if that wouldn't feel dreamlike or fake, or like all of this stuff would get really confusing. And so I kind of just wanted to integrate that excuse right in there so that you can kind of justify whatever you want. Or like the GM could justify whatever they want, but also so that players don't feel like they're limited in their suggestions, which I feel like sometimes happens in games like, you know, cyberpunk or whatever, where you have a specific tool to do a specific thing, and then that kind of implies that that's how you do that thing. You're like, well, I wanted to get away from that, just be really, really broken.
That's a topic that me and Hunter talk about a bunch, and especially because I listen to the RTFM podcast all the time. And for those that don't listen, go listen to the RTFM podcast. Max and Aaron are much smarter than us, and the episodes that you and Aaron do, like we very much talk about mechanics a lot, and I feel like you lot talk about a lot more of like the other parts of the games, like the themes and the intentions and things like that. Tell me if I'm off base with that. And it's so interesting to hear more of like the theory talking with TTRPG as opposed to just being like, this is a dice roll, this is a DR, this is and that. And it's really fun to listen. I've said this, I think I've said this to both of you at this point. It's like, I feel like I have heard you guys way more than you're ever going to hear me. And I feel like I know like so many of like the thoughts and opinions y'all have, even though we've never talked about it. And it's a very weird, like internet thing to have that experience.
Yes, our weird pseudo. It's not like we don't have a parasocial relationship because we do actually talk to one another, but it does feel almost there.
Yeah.
I feel like some
There are
kind of
degrees.
podcasts do that. Yeah. I forget also all the things that I say, and then people will be like, remember when you said this? And I'll be like, absolutely not. I do not. I believe that probably I said it, but I do not remember saying it. But yeah, I think part of that is that like, I think I am a little bit more system interested. I've said this, and Aaron, I think this isn't contentious to Aaron, but I'm a little bit more like system interested than Aaron is, and so I think I sometimes spend too much time going deep into like mechanical concerns, and I think part of that is also because I make video games, and that's very mechanical often. But I am very envious of all of the kind of more, I don't know, like mushy, poetic, emotional vibes that happen around, because I feel like I'm less good at that. Like it feels like a skill that I'm significantly less good at, and try to get better at all the time. But yeah, I'm curious. I guess this is a story game. I'm curious. I'm backtracking. I'm like, is this a like? Are we more story game focused? Is this? I guess like I'm like all games are story games.
100%. Yeah. Well, no. Well, yes. I mean, we're talking about like capital S, lowercase s, maybe, and then it comes to story games because there's plenty of OSR people that would tell you.
Not
hardcore.
all games are story games. You can have a story in a game that is not a story game. But this is definitely a more story-driven game for sure.
Well, it's interesting
because I think about this like, oh, sorry. I just think about this as one of my more mechanical games. Then, which doesn't mean it's not a story game. It's just for me leaning more towards like mechanical necessity than some other games where like you can take himbos and make your little characters, and then you could ignore everything and just talk it out. You know, like you can't talk this one out. You do need some kind of like record keeping.
Very fair.
Yeah.
This is one I definitely want to play because I felt the same way as I was reading it. When you go through the rules portion, basically, like there is definitely a lean into like the mechanics, you know, but then as soon as you get to the actual handbaskets, it is very, like, I felt like I had this like flip in my thinking when I started reading them, because I'm like, this is so broad. This is so open. Like it is literally like, there's no maps, because I imagine in a different version of this game from someone else, like this, it would be like 50 pages longer, and there would be like directions and maps and like all the rest of this stuff. And then you flip to the game, and then you flip the next page on a different game, and it's just like, oh, there's a lot of stuff open to interpretation from both the GM and the players in here. And it's interesting because a game that's, you know, relatively light can become heavy for those that aren't used to that style of play. And that's one of the things I always think with story games and rules like games in general. I don't remember what we were reviewing when we talked about this, Hunter, but sometimes like a game that's like super light can actually be like extraordinarily heavy for people that aren't used to that, because they don't have all of that scaffolding for like, but how do I do this? There's no rule specifically for this. And I'm like, you don't need the rule. That's fine. Like you can just do whatever you want, you know, which is in and of itself is also something that's like can be contentious, because I'm like, that's where we have a PBTA split. I think at least me and Aaron do, especially in our thinking of like the level of scaffolding and stuff that happens. But that's an interesting conversation I'd love to sit down and have with you guys at some point, is scaffolding in games and how it differs from like OSR and PBTA and story games and everything. I have no idea where I started that sentence.
I feel like part of my goal with Handbaskets was to just like let myself design what I would think of as like a 201 game. And I think because I think that like I think a lot of games are 201 games. A lot of games are not introductions to the hobby, right? Like but they don't own that. I think a lot of
Yeah.
OSR is 201 games and they don't really own that like not a super great way to introduce because you are relying on so much community knowledge, so much like oral history, blogs, experience, whatever, for people to actually like navigate your game. And sometimes like I think Himbos is kind of an okay 101 game. I do not think necessarily that Handbaskets is a 101 game. And I kind of intentionally let myself live there a little bit, which is a little bit of like trusting people to break the game, right? I think even just that framing implies that you would kind of know how games work. And a lot of it for me was also about where I find myself wanting games to sit, which is not ever a 400-page rule book, but is also
Yeah.
not nothing. Like I like tactical combat, right? Like I just got Necro Molds. Game's great. But
It's so bad.
it's so good. I'm so glad that I was financially irresponsible when that Kickstarter was running.
That's why I didn't get it because I was like, no, I've got to save money right now.
Yeah, I
I was
backed
like,
it and
I'm
unbacked it
doing
like
it,
3
and
times. Yeah.
yeah, it's so good. I love that stuff, and I think that I think that sometimes I think that that lives in a board game specifically, and that they excel in board game realms better, like that kind of tactical play. I think really wants a lot of specific rules, but I do like some rules. I just want the rules to meaningfully change the play. And I'm not convinced that a lot of games do that. This is my PBTA argument. We can have that conversation a whole different time. But I've never like rolled a PBTA move and not had it result in something that I didn't expect. I have rolled an attack roll 100 million times and had it result exactly in what I expect. Whether it's fail or success, it's like I know exactly the outcomes that are going to come in this interjection of mechanics. And I like to be surprised if there's going to be a mechanical intervention in what I'm doing. And this was kind of a little bit of this is me trying to explore the amount of scaffolding that I want as a GM, which is funny because you mentioned earlier I'm a way better game designer than I am GM, but I still try to design for myself sometimes. But yeah, in that often I find myself reading books and pulling a couple things out of them, reading an adventure and pulling a couple things out of them, not ever playing them with all of the elements. And so I was like, what if I just make a game that explicitly says pull 2 of these elements? Like pick the ones that are fun, pick different ones every time you come through it. What if I just give you a bunch of suggestions and kind of own that they're suggestions? Because I think some of my like least favorite gaming moments have been when people feel like they need to abide by the rule book. And when they're like, oh, that thing I just thought of would be super fun, but it conflicts with that other hidden detail that I know about, but the players don't know about, or like this internal logic of the game or whatever. And this was very much so like, just say the fun thing. And if it doesn't align, it doesn't align. And you can justify it later, or you can not justify it because witchcraft. I don't know. Magic
like
exists. It's not.
It's good for game designers and authors to like expressly give that. And this might kind of in a way relate to the 101 versus 201 type of game where whoever's writing the game, the author of the game, like gives that license like explicitly to the reader to like, hey, here's how the game is run, how I run it. If something else works better at your table, you should do that. I feel like that makes a major difference for how people determine those moments where they're like, oh no, it's written this way. And I feel like that kind of relates back to like, if you play 101 games, 101 games should give you that. And 201 games should kind of assume like, oh, you should know,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think I have thoughts, right? Of course I do. But like I think one of the issues with the space in general is part of the newness of it, but also like a lack of direction as a field, right? Like if I want to make a board game, I could buy 100 books right now on how to make a board game. Like if I just want game design in general, I can buy 100 books. But as far as like TTRPG game design, there really is no resource for that. Like specifically, a lot of the people that should be making really good books have actually exiled themselves from the space. But there's just a lack. Most of our field is in blogs for the last 15 years, and no one's really put it together or made thoughts about it. So we get this constant like rehashing of the same stuff over and over again, because you get all these people that are like discovering something for the first time that's been around for 20 years. So it's an interesting space to be, because then we get to have the same system matters discourse every 3 months because someone just discovered it for the first time. It would be nice to have like a book out there that had like indie TTRPGs for dummies, like the thing you're making isn't new, but just make it in a new way. It I don't even know where I'm going with this or what happened, but like it's just an interesting space to be in where, like I said, there is no North Star, I think, in the TTRPG space. And the difference between 101 games and 201 games, I feel a lot of it is experience and assumed knowledge. That's what I should have wrote there instead of textbook. That would have been better. But even within what we're talking about, there's a level of assumed knowledge where we're like, well, people should just know that you can just like hack your own thing. And it's just like, no, people don't know that. They just got into this like 4 months ago or 6 months ago or a year ago, and every game they played like isn't built that way. So even the idea of being like, you can hack it, do whatever, I feel like is still a bit of like assumed knowledge for people even knowing how to do that. In Intermirror Brightly, actually, the page me and Hunter talked about it a bunch. There's a page that talks about like, if it's uninteresting, like you can do something different, but then there's like a whole other like more to the page about like what you can do. And I'm like, this is such a great way to have like a 101 style thing where it's like, not only we all know this, we've read a million games, you've written a bunch, but they're like, you can hack it, but here's also how is a really good thing to have. And I think when there isn't that North Star of direction for people, the assumed knowledge, I think, is one of the pitfalls that happens a lot in the space.
Yeah, I hate a just make it up prompt. It's not helpful. There's like, that text to me does nothing. And so one of the things that I like was thinking about with this is like the list of, and this list went through many different names and it went through many different, but each Handbasket, please write an RPG manifesto, Aaron. So the way the game works is there's central rules, and then you have these handbaskets that are kind of mini games, and they all come with their own rules. And I standardized all of the rules that come with them. And one of the sections that comes with them is rules, secrets, and complications. And these are mainly suggestions. You could take them as hard things if you wanted, but it's mainly a pick list of what you think is fun. And which is because for me, you can change this if you want. But if you're just flipping to this page and you need some help, here's something you can pull to actually help you. Like if you don't want to make it up, here's a bunch of cool stuff, which I feel like is where I sit often. We read a book on RTFM called The Witch of Lindisfarne, and it has this weird, it's like a scene-based, there's some scene stuff happening, and it has these vignettes, and they're just, I took issue with them, and I don't remember why, because it was a long time ago on the podcast, but they have stuck out for me as like an interesting mechanical component where I think one of them was like a knife embedded in a tree. And it's just these like little images that you pull from to play off of. And I find that they were like super evocative. And most of what I want from a game is something like a knife embedded in the base of a tree. Like that is most of what I want your game look is just this tiny little snippet that I can pull out, because what I need help with as a GM is when I get stuck. That is the main reason I need a rule book, is for the moments when I don't know what to do. And what I want then is something that is like narratively compelling. or interesting or evocative or like, you know, environmental or whatever. Like it's that moment when my brain blanks and you're like, I don't need do a roll and make up the answer. I need something to put in here. I need you to give me a like actual like, you know, like I need something concrete when I'm stuck, not just do whatever you want.
See, that's the crux right there, because I feel like you get to that, like not you, just the broad you, people get to that point, and I feel like that point right there, especially for PBTAs, is like, structure this for me a little bit, like give me the pick list or give me these options. And that point right there is where I go, I don't want any of that structure, whatever. I want to be able to do whatever I want and go. I feel like that is the divergent point right there. I want to be able to make up whatever I want, like on the spot. And I don't want to feel, to me, that the kind of PBTA move style feels like a cage almost, because at that exact point where I go, I can do whatever I want, you know. And you can in PBTA with some of the narrative stuff, but I do feel like it narrows it in. And I feel like I feel like maybe in your Discord this came up before, and I was like, now I understand, now I get it, now I get why, you know, some people think this way and some people think that way. And I think that is literally the crux of it right there. It's just when that moment happens, I want absolute freedom, and some people want more structure to it. Like, don't just tell me, make it up. Like, give me a little bit of something. So,
Yeah, I think, again, we are going to have this episode at some point, but I think what I find PBTA does really good is in that moment where I'm stuck, it asks really interesting questions. But that is dependent on whether or not it's well written PBTA. And that is a whole other different thing. But I find the mechanics of PBTA interject a question that I would not have thought of asking, which brings up answers that I would not have thought of answering, both me and the players. And I can see how, because it is condensed, it is confined. It's not open to everything. But when those questions align with the like theme of the game, I find them super good. But that doesn't mean they all do that. But that's a total tangent.
well, that's, I mean, everyone I know that's a big PBTA head says that there's a million PBTAs and 4 good ones.
Yeah.
So
yeah. PBTA is really hard. It's so much harder to make than other game types. OSR shit is so easy. It is so easy. Just pick a mechanic from one of the 700 established mechanics and add a bunch of adjectives together and you have an OSR zine. And this is not like and I'm not saying that's not good and it can't be great, but it like is like significant. The barrier is significantly lower than writing something that is genuinely evocative. It is a harder exercise of game design to make a PBTA move than it is to make an OSR.
I'm going to now make a PBTA hack and I'm going to send you it and be like, what do you think about this, motherfucker?
You're going to say that and then you're going to sit down to write a move and then you're going to spend 8 hours researching how to write a move and you're going to be like, fuck this, I'm not doing it.
Oh, I have
just bookmark that one tweet. Yeah.
No, there are some great moves guide. I do think that actually does make a lot of sense. And that's probably why PBTA falls off so hard. Some of the time, the OSR really is like pick a mechanic and pick a few other mechanics that fit in to create your game, and then just color them a certain thing.
Do a bunch of drugs and write down what you see, and you got OSR, right? Like
So, do you not find PBTA to be restrictive?
I don't have a problem with games being restrictive because I actually want them to be more restrictive because I'm not what I want to play when I'm playing a game is the game designer's creative expression, not necessarily mine. If I wanted to play mine, I probably wouldn't pick somebody else's game. Why would somebody else know what I want to play in my game? That's an unreasonable expectation. I want to experience what they are trying to communicate, right? Like Aaron runs games, makes games, does all kinds of game stuff that I would never make up of my own accord. And so when I play an Aaron game, I'm like, I want to see Aaron's creative. I want to like poke around in Aaron's brain a little bit. So if it's confined to Aaron, the way Aaron thinks, that's a plus to me, right? Like that's, and I think usually I don't know. I've found that some of the games that I think are way stronger are much more solid in that perspective, right? I really like games that have a unique perspective on something and that will like necessarily in some way be restricted. If I wanted to play a classic fantasy game, yeah, maybe there's an argument because, and that is true, right? Like I think most classic fantasy games kind of are all the same classic fantasy game. Um, and or like when I play them, they probably all feel the same because what I want to play is my version of a classic fantasy game, right?
Right.
And so it doesn't, I don't think that the experience of playing D&D versus playing Dungeon Crawl versus playing Into the Odd whatever is inherently that different when I'm GMing. I do
Mm.
think that like, playing Pasión de las Pasiones is like so fundamentally different than playing DCC. That is such a different thing that is never, I could never get there with DCC, right? And I do think that that to me is interesting and often it pushes my own boundaries and that's a little uncomfortable, but sometimes but I want to be better at having my boundaries pushed, not put that on the game. Like I would like
Yeah.
to be better. I would like to flex the muscle of being uncomfortable because I don't know how to express romance or whatever. Um yeah, and it so I think it's more about like I have different expectations of confinement kind of going into different games. Uh and when I fight them on and not games are not very good at telling you what that is, like aren't very good at pitching you on like what your experience or confinement or what the vision is going to be. And so I think there is a lot of friction to be found in your own expectations if you're going into something like that. And so I think that those little blurbs about what the whole game is about frequently I don't find match up with what the game actually like makes me want to play. But I do find that some of them is like that's exactly why I'm here, right? Like playing, I don't know, something big like The Quiet Year or like Beak, Feather, and Bone. Like those, like they're very, very structured. And I really had a hard time with that when I was like off ramping from D&D. I had like a very hard time getting into what those games wanted me to do. And some of them I don't like, but I still think they're good games. They're just not the game I want to play, right? Like I don't necessarily love playing The Quiet Year. I'm so happy it exists. I'm so happy that so many people love playing it, but it's not like the kind of story I want to tell. But I don't think that's a failing of the game. That's just a like mismatch, right? Like we're speed dating and I'm moving on. Like it's not, like it's yeah.
Yeah, I mean that, at some point I'll blog and at some point I'll talk about why system matters and then also doesn't matter at all. But I think that's part of it. Aaron had mentioned in chat Jay Dragon's article about the puppy girl in the cage, and I really think it just comes down to like how big a cage you want. And it's all this. I just feel like it's just a cyclical argument. It's like everyone's saying the same thing, just in like a slightly different way. But I do feel like that's what it comes down to. Like the rules are there for a reason, and it's the engagement with those rules and the way that you both engage with them and choose not to is what creates the friction in the game that makes the game. And some people want a smaller cage so that they can bounce off the walls a little bit more frequently, and some people want like, just give me a yard and a shot collar and I'll figure out where the borders are. You know what I mean? So it's just an interesting take that Jay had with that. And I loved that article and completely agreed with it. And then I feel like someone like Aaron, I don't know if they agreed or disagreed with it, but I feel like they could read it and be like, yes. And it's like, we're both saying the exact same thing and agree on the exact same thing, but then we'll also play two very different games all the time. So it's an interesting thought about games and how people engage with them. It's like, what pops in my head a bunch is like tag. Like when I was a kid, like tag is tag, right? Except that Stuck in the Mud is incredibly different from Amoeba. You know what I mean? But you're all still running around, And
What's
that's how I thought about it. Are you serious? You never played Stuck in the Mud?
I know what Amoeba is, but
yeah, Stuck in the Mud is when you get tagged, you have to stop, like you're stuck in the mud, and someone has to crawl like underneath your legs to like free you from the mud.
Oh, okay.
but you can get tagged while you're trying to crawl underneath. So yeah, it's like freeze tag. Yeah. Well, no, what, like a different way to like unstick them or whatever. Yeah, I love tag as a
I know
kid.
that was not the crux of that whole statement, but that was the part I was like, what the fuck is that, man?
Do you know what stuck in the mud is, Max?
No, we did not play it. We did Amoeba and Red Rover. So
I feel like everybody has their different local whatever weird tag thing.
Christian in chat said Ryan is a real tag head.
Let me tag, you know?
This has been a really interesting conversation, Max. I obviously, like, you know, Ryan and I referenced that we're working on our own personal projects, and you know, I have no expectations for how big my own personal project gets, but like you talking about how you see like the confinement of certain rules as like a positive because you want to like experience that person's idea of like the experience they want to give out is not how I've been thinking about designing my own game. And I really appreciate that insight. Like, I feel like I just did a shrooms trip and my like reality was expanded by a small percentage, you know?
It's me, I'm shrooms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it, like, funnily enough, it goes back to that whole idea of like, are TTRPGs art? Because if the answer is yes, then I want to experience your artistic output, right? Like when I go to experience art, I'm meeting it on its terms. When I go to solve a puzzle, sometimes that's a little different, right? Like when the goals are not always the same, and I'm also not always in the same mood. Like sometimes I'm like, you know what I want to do? I want to go play Apex Legends. And other times I'm like, I would like to be really confused about what the game I'm playing is. And I do think that those are, and I do think that frequently, like the big fantasy heartbreaker is Apex Legends, right? Like you are going in with a lot of understandings about what this convention of game is, because an Apex here is a stand-in for every first-person shooter,
right?
Like
Absolutely.
They're all kind of the same, or very similar, at least in your engagement with them. Yes, sometimes, according to Aaron, sometimes I want to get drunk and play Skyrim for the 100th time. Yeah, like some things are very comforting, and sometimes, and part of this is also like, yeah, I thought I knew what I liked when I was playing Dungeons and Dragons for 10 years. And that was not I knew what I liked. That was I only know a couple things exist. Right. And for me, it is hard for me to confidently sit in I know every possible experience, and therefore I know which ones I like best. I know some that I like. I know things I have enjoyed. I know, like, you know, like there's a lot of stuff that I can say about my own tastes. But part of that is also acknowledging that there's so much that I don't know, and I kind of want to try it out. And I think but that is also like, that's a vulnerable ask, right? Like that, and that I'm not always down to be vulnerable when I'm playing games. And so I'm not always down to like play new games and like experience. And I have played games where I've thought I was down for that, and then have gotten into the game playing of it and have been like, oh, actually what I really wanted was something like comforting and familiar. And I'm sorry, and now I'm going to probably ruin our experience to like our ability to meet this game where it is, because I'm bringing all of these ideas. And I feel like, yeah, I'm not always super good at communicating those things, but I do have those weird, I have many wolves. All of the wolves live inside me, except for the really romantic ones.
No, it's I mean, it definitely is that, you know, I mean, even if you look at other types of media, like people have comfort TV shows. Like I've watched The Office like 18 times, you know, but sometimes I want to put on a 3-hour-long A24 film and just not understand what the fuck is going on for a little while.
Yeah.
You know? But I mean, it also comes down to like every one of us knows 20 drinking games, and every one of us knows 18 card games. And there's still people out there that only play D&D. You know what I mean? It's but I think it does come down to a lot of that vulnerability and the urge to play. But like, I know every time I've ever learned a new card game, someone explains the rules to me, and I still have no idea what the fuck is going on for like 4 hands, and then you get it and you go, oh, okay. And I think that people think that that is a common human experience, and I think that some people just don't either see it that way or want to take that level with TTRPGs, to just be like, I don't know what's going on for a little while, and that's okay. But you know, some people do, you know, and
I will I will do a thing. I will defend something that nobody's currently attacking right now, which maybe it's just me starting discourse. But uh, one of the reasons that I think about these things this way is because I do exist frequently in academia. And what academia in relation to games means for me is like, or my experience in it, which I do not think is a universal experience at all, is that it is about exploring the medium and the communication tools, and then also integrating a lot of the design that is possible. And a lot of the products that exist on the commercial side of games are replicating things for sellability and are not actually interested in exploring it. And most consumers are not looking for something new, right? It's not about having a new experience. And so I think that these things feed into each other in like a really clear way. And like my big, which is mainly just like, we do not actually understand or have a lot of references, you know, harkening back to what you were saying, but we don't have a lot of references for design patterns for RPGs. We have D&D design think pieces, which is such a small, like, if you think about the number of games that exist, not how many people play each games, D&D is non-existent, right? Like it's not a blip. When we look at all those charts about like how popular it is in those kinds of games, there's still such a small percentage of all the possible game designs that could exist and do exist in the world. And I feel like sometimes my frustration with like the indie sphere is that it's not even the indie sphere. My frustration with players, my frustration with people who play RPGs, myself included, is generally like not I guess maybe it is just that I don't understand being that person who wants to play the same game every day. Like when I play video games, I don't want to play the same video game. When I watch movies, I watch different movies more than I watch the same movie, you know? And that like I can want to watch a comfort movie. I'm still more frequently than not watching a different movie. And same goes for video games. But like I know some people that spend their whole lives playing exclusively Fortnite, so fine. I just don't want to be in design conversations or in community largely with people who want to play the same thing over and over again all the time. Like we don't have a shared interest. If what you like is Fortnite, I like video games. You like, right? Like it's a different thing. And I think that often sometimes hurts, or like that designers often like inhibit themselves preempting that community, preempting that like commercialship existing. And I think that does a disservice to games as a whole. And because I also think that like the line between, this is me just on my high horse, but the line between like what is a tabletop RPG and what is a LARP and what is a VR game and what is an AR game, like none of these things matter. These lines don't matter. And as we like exist in this world where all of these things can be very blurry and you can like have technological interventions or analog interventions into technology and all of these things, like we have to develop better language for what we're talking about when we're talking about games that isn't based on its technology, which I think is like, I mean, we need to have better tools for talking about the world that isn't based in its technology, right? Like a video game. Oh, you play it on a screen. Great. Congratulations. That doesn't actually tell us a whole lot about video games. How many of these games require a tabletop? When was the last time you played a game on a tabletop? Was it Discord? Because that's not a tabletop. Like these, like this whole, and I know we use analog games, but like, what does that even mean? It's fine. I just think that all of these kind of categories and design conversations we have are very inhibited by our lack of language. And our lack of language, I think, kind of retroactively or reflexively like hurts our design brains, like convinces us in our design brain that we're already stuck in these small amounts of tools to kind of explore. Yes. I bet you do, Christian. I bet you do.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with the space is people that think that the way that they play the game is the only right way to play the game. And then they like talk to you as if you're playing the game wrong because you're not playing the very narrow band of style of game that they play. Hence most discourse. You're not playing it exactly the way that I choose to play it, so you're wrong, and I'm going to write all these ways about how you're wrong. And that is one of like it's so stifling. Like it will never stop putting like shackles on the entire space if you have all these people saying that the way you're playing the game is wrong because it's not the way that I play the game, as opposed to just understanding it's different. Like I don't know. I wasn't in the space at the time, but I can't imagine all the Monopoly heads were yelling at Gloomhaven saying it wasn't a board game. You know what I mean? Like that just it makes no sense to me.
Monopoly heads.
Yeah.
Monopoly heads. Yeah, and I think that I think it's a shame because I think discourse at its heart, not discourse, the colloquial term, is quite required for us to develop the craft of TTRPGs, right? Like we do need to be in discussion with one another, and we do need to not sit in our isolated little rooms being like, I'm doing this for the first time ever. Like there, there is an importance in exploring what already exists and exploring the statements and ideas that people are already having, and it's the internet's fault that we can't do that in any kind of healthy way, which I think is why a lot of people talk about like the Forge era or whatever, which sounded equally toxic because it was just a bunch of dudes, but it was when it is talked about romantically, and I have no idea how authentic this is because I was not involved in the Forge, there is this idea of kind of investigating some of the language and tool sets and theories and ideas of RPGs. And I think that Twitter was not a good place to try and carry on that work.
No, Twitter's great for that. That was great.
Yeah, it was super good. But yeah, I don't know. That's a very large tangent about the theory of RPGs, but I think a lot about it. It is my job. And I am a person who really likes theory and also research and craft and all that stuff. And so you should write a blog, because I actually think blogs are one of the very few places where people don't fight about things. They just say what they think and are very like, take it or leave it, or like even if they're like arguing against something, because arguing against something sometimes highlights just as many things as arguing for. So like that is an important part of that discussion also. But I think that when you're saying this is my little platform, this is my little corner of the internet, and I'm going to speak all my opinions here, totally fine. You can say as many like, I think this game design sucks as you want on your little blog. I think that's what blogs are good for.
I mean, you can, but then people are going to argue in your comment section and on Twitter about it afterwards. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I think blogs are amazing. There's so many good blogs out now, and there's so many good theory in blogs from Forge era on, whether the people writing them were, chuds or not. A lot of the theory at least exists, and it exists, like I said, in the space, in blogs. And I think blogging is fantastic. There are a lot of great bloggers out there and people that write a lot of great stuff. I just, like I said, it's always this war about, like, I don't even know. It doesn't matter. Anyone that listens to the podcast gets opinions all the time, and that's fine. But this discussion is the kind of discussion I would love to have a lot more of, and this is one of the reasons I love RTFM Podcast so much, is because, I mean, I'm a systems guy. Hunter's more of a systems guy too. Like, we really love digging into systems here on the podcast. But then we get RTFM to listen to more of the theory crafting and the ideations and like discussions on even like ethics and morals and a lot of stuff with gaming and things like that. There's so much.
Finally covered anal wizards,
Yeah. Thank you. We're doing the Lord's work. The anal Lord's work.
With the sexy season,
Yeah, the sexy season continues. We're trying. I also really like systems. I just think systems are more amorphous and fuzzy than we think of them as. Like, I think that, a lot of the things that we use is like, I think most of the book is a system frequently. But I also, I do really like systems. I feel like it's I only do this in response to, I'm preempting Aaron's response, which is.
I love how you're on our show right now and you and Aaron are still kind of having a back and forth through the chat.
Aaron lives in my mind. Aaron's actually not real. Only Aaron is a robot that I've created on the internet. Yeah. But yes, I feel like it's because we talk all the time that it's impossible for me to not acknowledge that so much of my idea is developed in conversation. Like, so much of what I think about these things is developed either on the podcast or in response to Aaron and I discussing things. And so I have to, for better or worse.
God, if I was only more clever, Ryan would have that as well.
No. Hunter is a fantastic co-host here on the show. I wouldn't be able to do what I do without him, and it's really cool that you have Aaron to do that too, and that, like I said, we get to listen to it. I don't know if I said enough on the RTFM podcast. Go listen to it on where all your podcasts are sold. Really, really fantastic. I'm still going through past episodes. Whenever I'm sitting at work, I'm just like, all right, it's time to put on RTFM right now, and I'll just sit and listen to, Max. And I don't know. I still need to finish the was it Vice and Virtue episode? Man, a lot of boobs in that book.
A lot of boobs.
But yeah, no, it's I wish more people had these kind of conversations. I'd love to have more conversations like this on the show, and love to get more people together to have these kind of conversations a little bit more. Like, it would be really interesting to have you read, like, I think it's just called D6 from Adam Bass. I know we're bringing it all the way back to Adam Bass as we often do. Have you read that little 2-pager that they put out?
I have not.
It's just a really great little zine that just talks about, like, the D6 and, like, all the ways you can roll it and the interesting things you can do, and, like, a little bit of theory and a lot of math and, like, I would love if there was, like, something like that for just indie TTRPGs for dummies, where we could have a whole chapter on theory crafting and a whole chapter on, like, how D6s, D10s, and D12s and stuff work, and, and then just bringing together a bunch of, like, the big important blogs in the scene. That would be, let's write a book. Let's make this happen, Mr. Academia.
I do in fact like writing books. It has happened. Yeah, I mean, I think that's why it's hard, because I think it's like expensive, but I do think this is also the value of, like, magazine style zines, like, not game zines, but, like, here's a bunch of I will also plug Splat zine, I think, is in issue 5 now, and they get a bunch of different folks together to kind of chat about, like, different experiences. They have different themes, and so each version may appeal or not appeal depending on what theme they're covering. But I think they're trying to do some of that work as well, and I do like think pieces kind of being in conversation with one another.
Yeah.
If only people published these things and made books.
Well, listen, we all have a million ideas, and maybe one of us does one of them every now and then, is what it comes down to. But listen, when you're living under the burdens of capitalism, everything you do is there's a lot between an idea and getting it put out, even if it's just a stress of existing and paying rent, can be a burden to that. Wouldn't it be nice to go back to a time where we had patrons and we could just, do our own fucking thing with someone else pays for us to live? That would be, an ideal way to exist, huh?
Yes, as long as that didn't come with everything else that comes with the time of patrons. As long as we can just steal that little bit,
just
and
that one
the,
small, tiny microcosm,
social issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the 99% of the other stuff.
Yeah.
I've done a terrible job of talking about this game. So
we have also done a terrible job. At this point, I think what we're gonna do is review the game tomorrow, because this definitely went way longer than we expected, but that's not bad at all. This has been an amazing conversation. Really can't thank you enough for coming on. We need to do this more often. I feel like the last time you were on, we had, like, a similar conversation, and me and Hunter were both like, man, we love them. We need to talk to them more. Same with Aaron. It was amazing to talk to both of you guys. I know we've been chatting a little bit about having you on, and it was great to actually have that happen, both of you.
We'll do a crossover episode and have all 4 of us, and just do like RTFM, TWS, Kissin' podcast.
Maybe we have to do an inversion episode where Aaron and I only talk about systems and mechanics, and you two can only talk about theory and ethics.
Okay.
And we'll pretend to be one. I don't know who's going to be whomst, but this is.
Yeah.
I will get a better mustache. Either a bigger mustache or more head hair, and then I can be one of you, and Aaron can do something else.
There you go. No, Aaron in chat talked about doing a roundtable and bringing Christian on as well. That's another thing that we've wanted to do a lot, is to have various roundtables where we bring on a lot of people, and I think that'd be a really interesting conversation. And to have. Expect hope for more stuff like this, but don't expect very much is what I will tell our audience. We'll see what happens when it happens. But yeah, I think that's a good. That felt like a good. What does Aaron say? A tight 90 is where we're at. So I think that is our plan. If you're listening, just listen to the next episode tomorrow, because I think we're gonna bump actually going through Handbaskets to its own episode tomorrow. But again, Max, can't thank you enough. I really hope we are able to engage more with what did Christian say? Read the fucking weekly scroll. Well, we'll do more crossover stuff here. But thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for just being you and doing the things you do, because I really enjoy everything that you put out, and every time we get to interact is always a joy. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always lovely.
All right. Well, then that's going to be it for us. Listen to where can people find you? Where can people? I know above me, next to you, there's a giant thing that says huge board games. Where can people find Max Lander stuff? Where can people find RTFM? Where can people actually get all the fun engagement that I'm talking about?
Yeah, I mean, you can go to hugeboard.games. It's just going to redirect to my itch page, which I believe is Maxwell Lander on itch, which can also be how you could find me if you wish to find me on Twitter or Blue Sky or any of the other places. It's all Maxwell Lander. RTFM. Oh geez, I think it's just rtfmcast.com. We'll take you to all those places, and we have a fun Discord if you want to come talk about theory and all that nonsense. You can find Handbaskets at the itch. You can also, I'm saying this here and only here, and never hold me to it anywhere again. Maybe it'll disappear. If you want to get one of the remaining physical copies of Handbaskets, you can do so at oddfolkshop.com.
And you absolutely should. This is a great, great book on both ends. I'm super excited to talk about this tomorrow. I love this kind of like inspired by cyber metal and gone in its own direction. I think it's cool.
Also very excited for Odd Folk. We'll see. But yeah, check all that stuff out. Check them out. You know where all our links are. They're next to us, and we've done this before. You click stuff below. It's the internet. You figured it out. Again, Max, thank you so much for being here, and we will talk to all of you later. Bye.
Bye.